Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It's not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also be advised when it's safe to return to the meeting. We are recording this meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silence so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Thank you, everybody. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I don't think we have any apologies this evening. All here. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Any members have a declaration? Yeah, Council for Councillor Headley. Any others? No. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Have we all seen the minutes? And are we all happy with them? If I can get a show of hands for those in favour. Any abstentions? Yeah. Councillor Palmer, are you? Were you here? You here at the previous meeting? Yeah. Did you approve the minutes? Did you not put? I didn't see you put your hand up. Sorry. Okay. Yep. So, well, the only person that didn't see. Right. So that takes on then onto item number 4, which is the main item of this evening, which is the Capital and Investment Strategy 2026-2027. That's on page 13, and that is Tony.
Thank you, Chair. This report introduces the draft capital and investment strategy for 2026-27, and following consideration by this committee, the strategy becomes part of the wider budget report for consideration by Cabinet and by full Council. It's a requirement of SIPRA's Prudential Code that strategy is approved by full Council prior to the start of a new financial year. The strategy itself sets out parameters for officers to deal with Treasury management matters on a daily basis, and this covers 2 main areas, the first of which is to manage the Council's cash flows, and this means making sure that we have cash available in the Council's bank account when we need to meet liabilities or make payments. And the second part is to ensure that we've got any surplus cash is invested for a return for the Council. And the second way in which we manage Treasury is to manage the Council's debt position, and that's particularly in respect of borrowing. It should be noted by the committee that there are no significant changes being requested over and above those in place for the current strategy for the current financial year. So we're not making any significant changes for the strategy for 26-27. The strategy itself outlines 3 types of investments covered within its parameters. And these are service investments. This is usually capital expenditure used to create or maintain council-owned assets used for the provision of services. Second is commercial investments. These are usually purchased for the purpose of generating a financial return, and these are also known as debt for yield assets. And the third one are treasury investments, and this is the temporary investment of surplus cash. And these are outlined in sections 1 to 3 of the strategy. And I'll just go through each of those in a little bit more detail. The service investment section that starts on page 28 includes a draft capital programme for the General Fund and the HRA, and these are set out on pages 28 and 30 of the agenda, and include detail not only of the expenditure but also how that expenditure is due to be financed. And to the extent that this expenditure is financed from borrowing, this will increase the debt requirement of the Council. So in each of those, I think there's borrowing in both the General Fund and the HRA, and the borrowing each year is adds to the debt requirement that the Council has. Following budget setting, any additions to the capital programme that require an increase of borrowing will be subject to the approval of Cabinet. So we can't just add projects in, they need to go to Cabinet first. Also included in this section are investments in the Council's subsidiary companies, which are not expected to increase over the forecast period from the current levels. Section 2, which starts on page 33, covers commercial investments. Members should note that there are no plans for new spending in this area, and this type of capital spend is no longer permitted under the Prudential Code. So the information included in the strategy just sets out the expected performance of the existing assets. These include the out-of-borough investment properties and the investment lease arrangements, which are set out on pages 33 and 34. Section 3 from page 35 covers Treasury investments. These differ from the other two sections, as investments here are not treated as expenditure, so this isn't capital expenditure, it's just the investment of surplus cash balances on a short-term basis. We split these between specified and non-specified investments, with specified being with higher rated counterparties. The suggested counterparty limits remain at 5 million per counterparty for specified and 3 million per counterparty for non-specified investments, which is the same as they are currently. The only counterparty without a limit is the Debt Management Office, which is part of the Treasury, and they will always take excess cash. So anything that we've got that we can't invest elsewhere, we can always invest with the Debt Management Office. All of these investments follow the order of security first, then liquidity, and then yield in that order. So with security, we just want to ensure that any sum that we invest, we get back in full. So that's our first consideration. We then have to think about the liquidity of the investment. So we always have some of our investments that are what we call on call, so we can get them back on the same day. If we have anything unusual or any unforeseen eventualities that we need to deal with, then having cash on call as liquid investment allows us to deal with those. And only when we've satisfied those two requirements do we then consider the yield or the return that that investment generates. Section 4 from page 41 covers the expected debt position of the Council. Now, the measure for this is the Capital Financing Requirement, or the CFR, which represents the historic capital spend which has not yet been dealt with through revenue. Under normal circumstances, actual debt should not exceed the CFR, apart from very short-term working capital purposes. And any difference between the actual debt and the CFR is known as internal borrowing and represents where the Council is using existing surplus cash balances temporarily to postpone borrowing rather than investing this cash, and this approach is usually more financially beneficial to the Council. The table on page 42 shows the expected change in the CFR over the forecast period, and it's forecast currently to reduce by 10.8 million during 26-27. And at the end of 26-27, the CFR is expected to be at 791.3 million, which is split as follows. About 35% of that belongs to the Housing Revenue Account, or HRA. About 37% of it is related to general fund regular capital service investments, and about 28% of that figure is on commercial investments. Section 5 sets out the actual strategy statements, and these begin on page 45. The table on this page shows the actual forecast debt for 26-27, which is currently expected to remain relatively unchanged throughout the year, averaging £718 million gross or £713 million net of investments. The table on page 46 shows that this actual debt is expected to be maintained below the CFR for the whole of 26-27, which is where we would want it to be. This part of the strategy also sets out the interest rate assumptions that have been used for budget setting purposes, and those are included on page 47. The maximum levels of debt permitted by the strategy are controlled by the operational boundary and the authorised limit, which are also set out on page 47, and remain unchanged from the current year at 775 million and 825 million. Just to give a little bit more on those two, the operational boundary is like an early warning sign, so if we reach the level of the operational boundary, it gives us a warning that we should be looking at our borrowing and why we're borrowing at that particular moment in time. The authorised limit is an absolute upper limit on the borrowing that the Council is allowed to undertake, and should we want to exceed that, we would need to go back to full Council to get that limit increased, and that would come via this committee first. The strategy statement is summarised on page 49, and these are the items that we comment on in the quarterly reports that provide the committee with the assurance that we are operating within the restraints of the strategy. Section 6 covers risk management of these areas and how those risks are managed. Section 7 deals with minimum revenue provision, or MRP, and this area starts on page 57. The MRP is the amount that the council charges annually to revenue and to deal with the repayment of debt. The council is required to set out a policy annually of how the MRP is to be calculated for the forthcoming year against the various options permitted within the regulations. The options are set out on pages 57 and 58. And again, the committee should note that not all options are available for all types of debt. So as an example, options 1 and 2 are only available for pre-2008 debt. Anything post that can't use options 1 or 2 as a way of calculating MRP. The policy is summarised on pages 58 and 59 and complies fully with the regulations and associated guidance. It should be noted that there's no requirement to make an MRP charge to the HRA. And it should be noted also that there are no changes being requested to the MRP policy from the policy that's in place for the current financial year. Section 8 on page 60 sets out the budget estimates for these areas split between investing activities and capital financing. Section 9 includes an explanation of the required prudential indicators as well as the actual calculated indicators for the forecast period. These are internal indicators, so we don't use these to compare ourselves to others. They're just how we track changes over time and performance over time. The liability benchmark graph on page 65 shows that borrowing is expected to be maintained within the CFR levels over the next 10 years, although this is likely to include the replacement of some existing loans as they become due for repayment. I think that's everything I wanted to cover as far as background to the strategy in the report is concerned, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody got a first question? Yeah, Chris?
Just a quick question. Thank you. It was obviously very thorough. Just with the ongoing audit issues, I hate to use that word, but as and when they drop some of their reports in for the previous years, how will that affect this? And if so, when does that come to council?
So we're expecting, sorry, do you mean the audit reports as far as the completion of the accounts is concerned?
Yes, the external outstanding audit accounts are following whatever the years that are missing. I've lost track of it, yeah, you know what I mean, yeah.
So the committee should be aware that, or obviously will be aware that we dealt with 2021, 21, 22 and 22, 23 at the December committee. Those reports are currently back with the auditors doing their final checks before we complete them, so we're expecting to be able to do that fairly soon. We changed auditors following those 3 financial years, so we're now with EY, and they're expecting to bring their reports for 23, 24 and 24, 25 to the February committee, so the committee at the end of February, and hopefully they'll be able to sign those off at that committee. In terms of how they affect this, they're really 2 sort of separate things. They do some checks. So one of the things that they will do is, for example, make sure that all of our activities within the areas covered by the strategy is accounted for correctly. They do checks on balances at year end. So where we've got a balance of investments at year end or a balance on our borrowing at year end, they will do checks to make sure that those sums actually exist and are sitting with the counterparties that we've included in our accounts. They also check, and this is quite a common area for the auditors at the moment to have a look at, they do quite a lot of work on MRP now. It's a bit of a hot topic for audit at the moment, and they have a look at our policy, make sure that what we've actually charged through the accounts complies with the policy and complies with the guidance and regulations. We're happy that it does, but it is one of the things that they look at. The reason I'm sounding a bit hesitant is, as you're probably aware, there's quite a significant backlog. So there's been a restriction on the amount of work that auditors have been able to do over the last few years. They have done some work on some of those areas for 24, 25, and obviously there's a bit of time yet between now and the committee, so they might be completing some of that work between now and then. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to give the committee some assurance in some of those areas when they bring their report in February.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's why I asked, just to make sure if they do find something, drop it in pretty quickly. So yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Headley?
Yeah, as external audit has been mentioned, as you're aware, I chair audit at county, and EY are the auditors at county. And one of the things that they brought forward at county is the Section 26 Local Government Act 99, which I believe was amended in May 24. There are 7 key things, but as chairman of the audit committee here, are you confident that EY will find in Basildon's favour under that guidance?
Questioning me there, but yeah, I'm looking forward to working with EY on this, and yeah, I'm confident that they will get things done as they should, and I don't know if the officer has anything to add to that.
Not really. Are you referring to Section 26 as in as we approach local government reorganisation? And no. Sorry, I'm not with you. But if you can give me a bit of background,
Well,
sorry.
Section 26 best value. There's 7 themes under best value. So the auditors will be looking at best value on all of our financial dealings, and one of the themes is the use of resources. So while it may not be pertinent in a strategy, if the strategy fails the best value test, then you'll be in deep trouble. That's a good word. Looking at the penultimate paragraph on page 13, it's quite clear that the strategy is just that, a strategy. It may not even be used in its entirety. So there is a bit of a get out, but I would encourage the chairman to read Section 26 of the Local Government Act and become acquainted with the seven interdependent themes that support best value, because as I say, county have had a clean bill of health, and EY are giving an opinion on best value. If they're doing that in other authorities, I'm certain they will be doing it in Basildon. So I think it's an area that needs to be looked at in all of our strategies and policies, and particularly in the when those strategies and investments are actually applied in real life.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. Yeah, as I say, I'm sure that they'll be consistent with what they're doing elsewhere, and look forward to working with them. Any other comments? Councillor Myers?
Yeah, thank you. Just on the HRA and investments that are going into the HRA now, there is sort of consistent use of reserves each year of roughly £16 million for major repairs. Most of that money, as we know, obviously comes in through the rental side of the HRA to fund those, but obviously it lists it as the reserves. Are we comfortable with that level of investment into major repairs is sustainable going forwards?
The short answer is yes, but just to give you a bit of background in terms of how that figure is calculated, what that figure represents is the depreciation charge that we charge to the HRA on an annual basis. So that's already budgeted for within the housing revenue account revenue side. And what that does is it creates a sum called the major repairs allowance that we then move into reserves. It can only be spent on capital. We can't use it for any other purpose. So we do use that. It's one of the first things that we use to maintain our existing stock. And as depreciation's probably, I'm sure you're aware, that represents the cost of assets depreciating over time. So to reinvest that sum back seems like a prudent use of that level of finance. But that's where that sum comes from. So although it's a use of reserve, it is generated annually, and it's already budgeted for within the revenue side of the housing revenue account.
Nice.
Yeah, just on that, because obviously I'm a treasurer of a community association as well. We have assets in the community sector, like, fixtures, furniture, things like that. And I'm forever having chats with our accountant about depreciation, because values change all of the time. So are we confident that whatever we are depreciating existing assets to be, properties may increase, may decrease in value. So is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Like, how much is the housing stock worth? So how often does this take place? Is it once a year, every quarter, or every 6 months? In order to get a rough estimate of what the depreciation and the values of that, and then obviously how is that then collected? Because obviously if something has lost value, then obviously these figures will go down in future. So could you just clarify and summarise? Thank you.
So the way that this works is we look at our housing stock. We don't depreciate the land element of our housing stock. We only depreciate the buildings element of it, which is about 80% in total of our housing stock value. And it's done on what's called a beacon basis. So obviously we've got about sort of 10,500 properties, give or take, at the moment, and it would be impossible to go out and value every single one. So what we're permitted to do under the regulations is to put each of our properties into a beacon, which is a sort of typical example of a property of that type. And then we can extrapolate those values across the whole of the housing stock. It's just the way that the accounting regulations allow us to do it. And that's done annually, and we reset these depreciation charges annually. It's done over 50 years, and they're reset annually. So if we do get a downward valuation, we haven't had for a few years now, but if we do get a downward valuation, then it would affect that year, and we'll have a look at other resources that we might have available to bring in to use to top up the repair budgets if we need to. But like I say, at the moment we're not expecting downward valuations, but we are able to respond to those on an annual basis if we need to.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wise, you got anything to come back on that one? Okay. While we're on the HRA, one thing that I noticed is that external works, the budget for that seems to be going, or the estimate for that seems to be going down each year, which surprised me, because I would imagine as our properties get older and older, that the need for external works would go up and up rather than down and down. So do we know the reason for the estimates going down on that?
I will need to check the exact reason for the services. I wasn't able to get an answer on that one today, unfortunately, but there is a cycle of work that they follow. It isn't done, or the way that they plan these works, again, I'm sort of talking on their behalf, and I probably shouldn't be really, but the way that these things work is they're not necessarily responding to immediate need to do things. These are things where they know that there's a life on particular components of a property, and they'll plan works over a number of years to deal with those. So it may just be that it's that cyclical change in terms of what bits of external and planned works are done at what particular times, but I will try and get a bit more detail for you on that and circulate that round.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep, Councillor Headley.
Well, it might be helpful, Chairman, if the Housing Scrutiny Committees met last night, and one of the items on the agenda was the new Tenants Handbook, which listed tenants, parts of the repairs and maintenance that tenants would be liable for, and what the council's liable for. And there were a number of questions. Councillor Brockman was there as well, and we were asked to give feedback on improving the handbook, and a number of suggestions were made, particularly around electrical safety, and we were given an assurance that even on the older properties, consumer units have been replaced and rewiring where necessary. So it might be helpful if you could get a copy of that and bring yourself up to date with that particular handbook.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Headley. Unfortunately, I didn't catch the meeting last night, but I'll be sure to catch myself up. Any other members got questions on this report? Yeah, Councillor Myers.
Just a clarification, because I don't, not quite sure what it means, but obviously it's still on the HRA capital budget. You've got capital receipts and capital receipts 1 for 1. I just wondered what the difference was. I'm not aware. I don't know what it means. So I just wondered if you could just fill me in, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So capital receipts are just general capital receipts that the council gets from our share of the receipt of sale of properties sold under the right to buy legislation. So that's our share of that. What happened a few years ago is the government permitted the council to keep an additional share of that sum, but they put some restrictions around the use, and we were only allowed to use those sums for the direct replacement of affordable housing, so on new housing. So they can't be used for repairs. They can only be used for the acquisition or the building of new properties. So they part fund the line that says new build and acquisition programme. The capital receipts 1 for 1 part fund those budgets rather than the repair budgets. And if we don't use them for that purpose, we have to return them. So we try and make sure that we use those.
Thank you for that clarification, because obviously the amount of capital receipts, obviously this is the strategy for 2026-27, but obviously we as a mid-term financial forecast obviously go forwards, look at things. There seems to be a massive reduction in the capital receipts that were an estimate for the following years, and a quite drastic increase in borrowing to fund HRA work. So, for example, £10 million in capital receipts, nearly £7 million in capital receipts 1 for 1, and then the following year, 27-28, capital receipts 4 million, capital receipts 1 for 1, 4.6 million, but the borrowing goes from 4.7 estimated 26-27 to nearly 12.5 million in 27-28, 14.8 in 28-29. Going forwards. So I just wondered, what is the rationale behind that if the right to buy sort of stuff is still going on, and obviously the other things that we're talking about, are we not expecting to receive capital receipts in the future?
So one of the things that we've dealt with as far as the budget setting for the HRA for this year is the new regulations around right to buys. As you're probably aware, government introduced some changes to the right to buy arrangements so that the discounts are not as big and don't accumulate as quickly as they used to. And we are expecting that to have a knock-on effect on the number of properties that we sell, and subsequently the amount of right to buys. The amount of capital receipts that we've got available to us. We're not expecting it to stop completely. There will still be, but we are expecting a reduction over the next few years of those. And essentially the high amounts for 26-27 are just where we've currently got a bit of an accumulation of capital receipts. So rather than the HRA taking on additional borrowing, we're using those first, as obviously it's more beneficial for the HRA to use those rather than take on borrowing and have the interest costs associated with that. So that's the sort of rationale behind it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I assume EY will be looking at this, because obviously there will be a quite significant jump in the amount of borrowing that we needed in terms of what works will need to be done to properties in the future. I mean, it's nearly another £8 million extra debt to borrow to finance works on the housing stock. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. It's not unusual to have some element of borrowing, and yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I don't know if it's helpful, but when the budget report comes forward, within that there's a 30-year business plan, and we have programmed in some debt repayment for the HRA. It's not until a bit further along, so it's a bit further down the line, but we have managed to put in some debt repayment for the HRA, which will bring the borrowing down a bit. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which years that is currently, but yeah, so there is some planned debt reduction as well. As far as the auditor's concerned, I mean, obviously they will, as I'm sure Councillor Headley sort of commented earlier, you know, they will comment if they feel that there's cause for concern. They will comment and they will bring that to the committee for your consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Wise, you got any other questions on that one? No. Councillor Headley?
Just as appreciate councillors and members have little time outside of their normal committee work. Somewhere buried in the papers it referred to training sessions being available for officers. Are the same training going to be offered to members, because they are quite complex papers, trying to keep abreast of changes in legislation, trying to understand the work the auditors do. Can be quite complex, particularly if you're a new councillor, and for those of us that have been around a long time, it's probably our memories that are at fault rather than anything else. But there is a lot to get your head round on these papers. So I know it's difficult to get councillors to attend briefing sessions and training sessions, but I would encourage the administration to at least try and give, even if it's only broad brush, introductions to how finance in local authorities works and the requirements of auditing. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Headley. I think that's something that we can take up separately with the Democratic Services team and the relevant cabinet members. Councillor Brockman.
It's Tony's. Right, I can be Tony tonight. Okay, so it's Eunice actually. I'm going to agree with Tony, but what I'm going to say is training should be mandatory. No excuses, no like I'm on holiday, I'm walking the dog, I've got to go for a meal or whatever, I've got to go there and that's it. And we should all sign in. And what we should do is publish who turns up to these training meetings and who doesn't. You know, and in that way, everyone gets to see it, don't they? Including the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Brockman. Yeah, I know that Democratic Services do take note of who attends training sessions, and my other role on this, well, one of my other roles on this council is sitting on the planning committee. I know that training is mandatory as well. So, so yeah, it's certainly something to take away for the future. Any other members got any questions on the agenda item? No, just a few quick ones from me. On page 28, the general fund capital budgets. I understand that there's some sort of that are just have a budget for 2026-27, things like the Westgate and Community Diagnostic Centre, which you would expect to only run for the coming year, as they're sort of under construction and being hopefully sorted by the end of that financial year. But parks equipment has a budget for 26-27 and then no budget going forward. Does that mean that we're not expecting any new parks equipment after 2027?
Not necessarily at the moment. I think that's the end of a programme that's been running for a few years, where we've done some large-scale parks equipment replacement. It's one of those areas that is sometimes borderline between revenue and capital, depending on the scale of what's being undertaken. So if they're actually replacing equipment, often we can capitalise it. If it's just repairs to existing equipment, then it's generally revenue. So I think what's being expected here is, because we've just dealt with the programme over a number of years, that those items can be dealt with through the revenue accounts just for maintenance, and then it might be in subsequent years they'll need to bring in some budgets again for replacement. So I think that's probably the thinking behind it.
Okay, thank you. That clears up. Councillor Murphy, did you have a question on that?
Yep.
Oh.
Right, whilst we're on page 28, excuse my throat as well, down the resource and commercial ambulance hub, I haven't heard anything about this recently, yet there's £3 million down there, presumably waiting to be spent next year. Is that progressing forward, and that is the budget for it, is it?
Yeah, so just for members that aren't aware, the ambulance hub project is where the council is using its land to build a centre for the ambulance service, and then we're going to lease it to them over a number of years, and we'll recover the costs that we've incurred during that lease period. It is progressing. I don't know off the top of my head exactly where it is at the moment. I'm happy to get an update and to circulate that round if you would like it. But my understanding is that it is progressing, and we're just waiting for sort of final documents to be signed before it gets underway. But it might have even extended beyond that at the moment. But I'll ask the relevant service manager to give us an update that I can circulate.
Yes, I would like an update, as purely for the fact I was at the hospital today and you couldn't move. There must have been 25 ambulances parked everywhere. No, there wasn't any patients in any of them. People eating their grub and just sitting around. There need to be over the last few days. As you know, I go up there regularly because it's a job I do. The hospital is grinding to a halt with ambulances, basically. No, it's just ridiculous. They could do with being moved somewhere else. So if they are going over there, the quicker the better, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thank you. As we've, I sit on planning as well as Councillor Harrison does, Chairman, and we see NHS can be very difficult to deal with, and in terms of getting projects moving and forwards, they're not the not the best red tape organisation in the world in terms of that, which leads me on to, obviously, we're talking here about capital investments and the strategy going forward for next year. But obviously there's nothing in this report, just done a search as well through it, there's nothing in here about Section 106. I just wondered why, because obviously there is obviously an account that's held at Basildon for potential capital funding, and a lot of these developments have now begun. So a lot of these capital expenditures are likely to go ahead within the next financial year and the one afterwards. I just wondered, why there was no mention of potential investment from the 106 in the strategy going forwards.
So usually for the capital programme, we rely on service managers letting us know what their plans are for the coming year and how those are going to be financed. So I know, for example, in 25/6, so in the current financial year, we've allocated some significant Section 106 sums related to affordable housing to the properties in Broadmain and Chapelgate that have been bought by the HRA. So some of it's been used for those purposes. But you're absolutely right, there is pots of Section 106 sitting there, but we are still waiting for service managers to tell us how they're going to utilise that. They've usually got, as you're aware, sort of conditions associated with them. We can only use them for specific things, but we are still waiting for service managers to sort of let us know how they want to utilise those budgets. And once they do that, we'll include them in the programme.
Yeah, Councillor Myers.
Thank you for that answer. It does make sense. But then, of course, there's a problem that if the service managers don't do anything, that money is potentially returned to developers and not used. And we have seen it before with the NHS just mentioned, education. Developers either haven't fulfilled their obligations, and therefore the money can't be spent because something has happened, and the project can't take place within 5 years, so the money has to be returned. It's interesting because I think that as an audit and risk committee, there is quite a substantial pot of money that is sitting there in Section 106, and if it's the sort of service managers trying to find projects in which to, well, not find projects, but identify existing need, because I'm sure they've got loads of things they'd love to do, and where they go with it, and obviously in contact with ward councillors, etc., or ward councillor feedback as well, what they would like to see, what's available per ward, because we know it can only be spent at the moment in the vicinity of where these places have been built, or going to be built. So from a capital point of view, there's a substantial amount of money which could be used to potentially offset some of the borrowing for some projects. But then obviously we don't see this in this report for the strategy going forwards until you hear back from service managers, is what you've basically just said. You know, not going to paraphrase. You said what you said. I have to say what I have to say. But it is a bit of a problem, because I don't know how much of the money's been given back over the last few years. I imagine some of it has, and that is a concern, considering that, you know, planning applications get passed based on the fact that these capital requirements are required and should be therefore spent. So I hope you take that back to the service managers, and obviously, you know, the Audit and Risk Committee would like to see some updates on Section 106, if that's okay for the chair, in this for a working group or back to the committee report, just to see where we are, where the land lies, so we have a full idea of where we are with that kind of capital expenditure.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good idea. Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Myers. Councillor Headley? Yeah,
Can the officer offer some clarity around 106 money? We talk about, you know, it's a condition of planning that 106 agreements are put in place. Does that money then come across to Basildon and or county and sit in a bank account somewhere, or is it just when the trigger point to spend that money occurs that the developer parts with the money? Because I think some councillors are confused as to where that money sits.
So each agreement is can be quite unique. So there are some where the developers are happy to make the payment up front so that they've dealt with it and they haven't got to worry about it anymore. There are other agreements where there are triggers where the council has to actually request and invoice the developer for the money when the development reaches a particular point, and there might be more than one trigger point in a particular phase. And then there's complications around how we account for that money, depending on whether there are conditions applied or whether the money is just given to the council to spend, and the use is fairly wide and there's not really a requirement to repay it, which is the case in some agreements as well. Generally what happens is when the developer pays, it just survives as cash into the council's bank account. We do keep it in reserve, so in terms of the council's accounting system, they are kept in a specific area, so it's not like those sums get confused with other sums and get consumed where they shouldn't. There is a specific area in the council's ledger system where we keep those, so we can keep track of what funding is available. And again, you know, it's one of those areas, the application of grants and whether we've accounted for it correctly is one of the things that auditors look at the end of the year as well, and they'll often ask us to look at the original agreements to make sure that we've dealt with those correctly. In terms of the actual cash, though, that's dealt with in the same way that we deal with all of our cash. Is that, you know, if it gives us a surplus, then we can use that to offset borrowing in the short term or to invest in the short term as well. So it doesn't just sort of sit somewhere necessarily. I'm trying to think if there's any occasions where developers have asked us to keep money in specific accounts. I can't think of any offhand. That happens sometimes with things like rent deposits, but not with Section 106 as far as I can recall. So we just, like I say, we've got a specific place in the ledger. We keep track of all of those sums, what projects they're associated with, what we can use those sums for, and then, you know, we know that those resources are available as and when they're required.
Thank you for that answer. I think it might be, without putting the officers to too much work, it might be worthwhile in somebody going through the figures and saying how much money is being held how much is been agreed in a development, in a planning approval, but hasn't come across as cash. It's just sitting there waiting to be drawn down when triggers are met. And anecdotally, people bandy about enormous figures. You know, I recently heard that we were sitting on 6 million of unspent 106 money. Well, I don't believe we are personally, but I'm happy to be proved wrong. So I think if it wouldn't take too much officer resource through the chairman, I'd like to ask that some clarity around 106, what is held, what has been promised, and if it's at all possible over the last 5 years, how much money developers have actually had returned to them because it's been unspent.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll just say that yeah, they are important questions and definitely something that's worth looking into either at a committee meeting or at, probably more likely one for a working group. Tony, did you want to?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say that we're more than happy to come back with that information and sort of share it with either the committee or the working group, whichever is the most appropriate setting for that. It won't be too onerous for us to pull that together, so that's not a problem at all.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murphy?
Yeah, I must admit I'm totally in agreement with Councillor Myers and Councillor Headley here. But what I don't understand here, I mean, me personally, I've got a house and I've got a wish list. I want to do this, do that and do that. And when money becomes available or I feel I can borrow some money or do whatever, I get it done. Now, what I don't understand is these officers and areas, you know, I won't name names, but we'll say the Parks area. I mean, he's sitting there and he wants to renew a playground or make another playground in a park, and it's going to cost, I mean, I see the budget there is 116,000 this year. And some money comes along on 106. I would have thought the officers would be falling over themselves to rush down and say, you've got some money for children, I've got a playground which is going to cost, you know, 60, 70, 80,000, can I have it now? And we'd be saying, well, hang on, you know, they've got to start the building first in 6 months' time and then we get the money. Just wait. I don't understand why. I don't know what the 106. I know the 106 is sometimes build roads, which is obviously counting. I know they do this and that, education, which is schools. But from our point of view, surely any money that comes available or going to become available, so I'm sure we know about it a few months before we get it. I don't understand why we haven't got plans for it, like many people are out to spend their wages at the end of the month, and we're going to spend it when we're getting it in 6 months' time. Why isn't there any plans? Why isn't there wish lists by all these officers and groups of officers or areas of officers or areas of, you know, the responsibilities? There's somebody on their desk saying, you know, I'm in Parks, I would like this and this, and somebody in, I know, I'd like this community hall, that community hall, I'd like this done up and that done up. We've got some 106 money coming. When's that 6 months' time? Oh, look, I've got a community hall just down the road from there. Can I have it for that? You know, I would have thought they'd be fighting over who could get hold of it. But that's my opinion.
Just to give you a bit of reassurance, hopefully, there are some projects in the current year's capital programme and in the current year revenue side that are funded from Section 106. And again, as part of the work we do in terms of the background to that, we'll make that information available. But I don't want to create an impression that, you know, it's never looked at, never considered, and, you know, we never get requests. It's just one of those things. Sometimes it's difficult to forward plan on. So sometimes you know it's quite short term when you get the money in, or, you know, what you're going to do with it. So we can, again, as part of doing the work that the councillors have requested, we'll make sure that members are aware of what's in the current programme as well, because there's certainly a number of projects in the current year's financial programme that are a capital programme that are financed from Section 106. So that you know, there's nothing happening. It just may be not as quick as we would like, possibly.
Councillor Brockman.
Sorry, but you're all going to hate me on this one. Okay, so over 20 years ago, a little bit of a history lesson here for you all. There was a building built in the middle of Wickford, quite a high one. I think you'll know where I'm on about, Alex. Up a bit further. Anyway, there was some S106 money that was promised by the developer to Basildon Council for CCTV to go in for the subway right by it, Golden Jubilee Way, yeah? Or whatever the road was called, I can't remember that. Anyway, I know, because I was on Wickford Action Group at the time in 2002, and we tried to find out who paid the money in. The developer said he paid the money. Basildon Council said they never received the money. The developer couldn't prove that they'd sent it. Basildon Council can't prove that they never received it. And that has been going on now for 24 years. And I can tell you now, they still can't find that money, and no one can prove one way or the other. So I've got no faith in S106 money at all, because no one knows where anything's going. It just seems to go into a hole, into the ether, and disappear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Myers.
That's all right. I do know the block of flats you're talking about now is the one that's next to Golden Jubilee Way. Yeah, and I have heard that there's been some a few tens of thousands for upgrading CCTV. It's never been allocated, never been spent. No one knows where it is. It's a mystery. But what I'd like to see, obviously, in this report this evening is, obviously you can't put a figure on it, but perhaps an addendum into it, because there is no mention in this strategy at all about Section 106. And I think there's something in there about when Section 106 becomes available and a project's identified, it is used, but first and foremost, in order to facilitate some of the general fund or HRA works that are going on. I mean, I don't know whether or not it says HRA capital receipts to include Section 106 in that. I very much doubt it because of the legal agreements and things like that. But I think it might be worthwhile that perhaps an addendum saying that once Section 106 or SEAL, if it becomes SEAL compliant, money comes in, that it is there. It can be, hopefully utilised for a project nearby, and I just think it might be worthwhile that we have that as an amendment to this document, just to mention something about Section 106, because I think it is quite a big important thing, and it could be, I know a lot of it goes to county, the big stuff goes to county, but we still sometimes receive, or if we do receive, in excess of maybe 60,000, 80,000 for open space play, parks, etc. From bigger developments, and it'd just be nice to see something in it basically saying that the money will be spent, and not just held on to, because I think it's right that money's not allowed to earn interest, or it can earn interest, but once the money's spent, you can't keep the interest. It has to go back to you can't use that money as a source of income. It has to be allocated and spent. If it has earned interest, and that interest has to be returned. Yeah, I thought that was correct. So I think it might be worthwhile just having perhaps a page or 2-page addendum in this report, just to say Section 106 is considered in the capital strategy, etc., etc., etc. I hope that makes sense and be able to go back on that.
Yeah, so if the committee's in agreement, I'm more than happy to add some wording into this report before it goes to Cabinet to include some information on Section 106 as outlined by the councillor.
Yeah, personally, I don't have an issue with that. I'm sure no members do. It's useful to get in before it goes to Cabinet and full council. But as we've said already this evening, there will be we intend to hopefully speak more about Section 106 in more detail as a specific item, either at the committee or at a working group, depending on where's more appropriate. But yeah, so we'll be discussing that in more detail. But in terms of the report going forward, I think is if if the officers think that that's feasible to do, then I'm happy with that. Any other comments? No. In that case, the recommendation for this item is that the committee endorses the draft capital and investment strategy for consideration by Cabinet and subsequently for approval by full council. All those in favour? That's yeah, Councillor Myers.
With the amendment about 106.
Yeah, with the additional addendum on that. So yeah, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe journey home. I've forgotten the work programme. We've been speaking so much.
Good try.
Yeah. Right. Well, in that case, we're moving on to item 5, which is the work programme 2025-26. Any comments on? That's on page 71. Any comments on the work programme? No. In that case, thank you everybody. Thank you everybody. Have a safe journey home again.